Being able to draft in the NBA is far from perfect. That's why we've seen NBA legends not go first overall, like Michael Jordan in 1984 and Kevin Durant in 2007. And sometimes NBA teams will pivot to the trade market on draft night to get a more proven player rather than drafting the unknown of an NBA prospect. So for today's video, we are going to look back at the 10 worst draft night trades in NBA history. Teams gave up eventual Hall of Famers for some immediate success, but in the end, it just wasn't worth it whatsoever. The Celtics dynasty in the 1980s was largely centered around the trio of Larry Bird, Robert Parish, and Kevin McHale. While Bird had joined the club in 1978, the other two players were both acquired by the Celtics on the same day during the 1980 NBA draft. The Celtics traded the 1st and 13th overall picks in the draft for the 3rd overall selection and 4-year veteran Robert Parish of the Golden State Warriors. Parish had scored 17 points a game in the previous 2 seasons for Golden State and was emerging as one of the best big men in the NBA. The Warriors, however, thought he was worth giving up so they could go out and select Joe Barry Carroll out of Purdue with the 1st pick and Ricky Brown with the 13th. Neither had careers comparable to Robert Parish alone. Despite having the reputation as a bust, Carroll's numbers with the Warriors were actually very solid. He averaged 19 points per game in his rookie season while snagging 9.5 rebounds. Parish would go on to win 4 NBA championships with the Celtics, score over 23,000 points in his career, and become a 9-time All-Star. And oh yeah, the Celtics used the 3rd overall pick in that trade to pick up Kevin McHale, who would go on to be a 7-time All-Star, a 3-time NBA champion with the Boston Celtics, averaged 18 points and 7 rebounds in over 970 games for Boston, and ended up being inducted into the 1999 Hall of Fame. The Pacers and Spurs executed a draft night trade in 2011 where the Spurs traded away budding guard George Hill in exchange for Davis Bertans and Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard was used with the 15th overall pick on draft night, and the Pacers had a chance to pair up 2 elite defensive wings in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard together, but they went out and they got George Hill, who spent 5 years with the Pacers. He averaged around 12 points, 4 assists on 45% shooting, but he never made it to an All-Star game. Kawhi would go on to be one of the best two-way forwards for the San Antonio Spurs over the next half decade. He ended up being the 2014 Finals MVP for San Antonio, won Defensive Player of the Year the following year in 2015. He ended up winning Defensive Player of the Year again in 2016, and he also finished runner-up in MVP voting that season. He finished 3rd in MVP voting in 2017, and was a top 10 player in the NBA. Would go on to win Finals MVP with the Raptors in 2019. And is a top 75 player all time in NBA history. Back on draft night in 1998, the Suns and Mavericks completed a trade where the Mavericks traded away Bubba Wells, Pat Garrity, Martin Millsap, and a 1st round pick in the following year in return for Steve Nash, who eventually ended up being one of the greatest point guards of all time. Just to give you an idea of how bad of a trade this was for Phoenix on draft night, none of those players ever averaged more than 11 points per game in a season, and Bubba and Martin played a combined total of 122 games in the NBA. The return that Phoenix received for Nash was abysmal. Dallas scored Nash for next to nothing on draft day, which elevated Dirk Nowitzki's game immediately, their franchise player, someone we'll get to in a little bit. Nash's playmaking could have been a major reason as why Dirk's development was as consistent and quick as it was. Nash played 6 years in Dallas where he averaged 14 points and 7.5 assists while shooting incredibly high percentages from anywhere on the floor. Nash and Nowitzki were one of the greatest duos in the NBA at the time. The Suns did get the last laugh at the end of the day though by signing Steve Nash after his 6-year stint with the Dallas Mavericks. And in his years in Phoenix, he won back-to-back MVPs in 2005 and 2006 and led the Suns to a conference finals appearance. So at the end of the day, this wasn't the worst trade in the world for the Phoenix Suns in the long term, but for 6 years, they were the laughingstocks of the NBA for this deal. In the 2017 draft, the Denver Nuggets selected Donovan Mitchell with the 13th overall selection and traded him moments later to the Utah Jazz for Trey Lyles in the 24th overall pick, which ended up being Tyler Lydon. Trey Lyles played 2 years for Denver where he never once eclipsed 10 points per game in a single season, and Tyler Lydon only played in 26 games for the Nuggets, where he scored a total of 23 points. Donovan Mitchell will go on to spend the first 5 years in his NBA for the Utah Jazz, where he averaged 24 points, 4.5 assists, and 4 rebounds a night, shot 44% from the field and 36% from 3. He was the runner-up in the 2018 Rookie of the Year voting. He ended up being an All-Star in his final 3 years in Utah. And in the 2020 playoffs, Donovan Mitchell averaged 36 points against the very same Nuggets team that drafted him only 3 years prior. Just imagine imagine if the Denver Nuggets drafted Donovan Mitchell and they had a big three of Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, and Donovan Mitchell? That could have been one of the better big threes in NBA history. In the 2001 NBA draft, Pau Gasol, a 7-foot power forward out of Spain, was chosen 3rd overall by the Atlanta Hawks. But on draft night, he was traded along with Brevin Knight and Lorenzen Knight to the Vancouver Grizzlies for Sharif Abdur-Rahim and Jamal Tinsley. Abdur-Rahim would only go on to play 2.5 years with the Atlanta Hawks before getting traded to the Portland Trailblazers in the 2004 season. And he was not the same player that he was in Vancouver for the first 5 years of his NBA career. Gasol went on to play for the Grizzlies for 7 seasons, winning Rookie of the Year honors in 2002, became the team's all-time scoring leader, passing the man he was traded for. He made the All-Star game in 2006 while playing in a Memphis uniform, and led the team to their first 2 playoff appearances. And unfortunately, Atlanta, this is not the final draft day blunder that we're going to talk about in the video. As the 2006 NBA draft neared, debate raged on as to whether there was more potential in a Texas power forward in LaMarcus Aldridge or LSU big man in Tyrese Thomas. Aldridge had a more refined game, but Thomas had off-the-charts athleticism that many thought would translate better into the NBA game. After the Raptors selected Italian big man Andrea Bargnani with the 1st overall pick, Chicago went on to select LaMarcus Aldridge, making him the 2nd overall pick in the draft out of Texas. With the 4th overall selection, the Trailblazers took the next best thing in Tyrese Thomas, but soon after, the 2 teams would swap big men. On draft night, Portland sent Tyrese Thomas to the Bulls along with Victor Krajpa for LaMarcus Aldridge and a future 2nd-round pick. Tyrese Thomas would go on to spend 3.5 years in Chicago before getting traded to the Charlotte Bobcats in the 2010 season. He went on to average 8 points and 5 rebounds for Chicago and just shot 45% from the field. And the rest was history for LaMarcus Aldridge and the Portland Trailblazers. He spent 9 years in Portland, averaging 19.5 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 2 assists a night, shooting 48% from the field. His last 4 years in Portland, he made All-Star games and is one of the more underrated power forwards of the 2010s in general. This was just another example of the Chicago Bulls being a poorly ran franchise in the post-Michael Jordan era. The Hawks definitely made out in this next trade that I'm going to talk about, but they gave up a generational player during draft night in 2018. The 1st overall pick was DeAndre Ayton to the Suns, and the 2nd overall pick was Marvin Bagley to the Kings, a pick that shocked a lot of people. And the Hawks were in prime possession to select one of the most accomplished NBA prospects in quite some time in Luka Dončić, somebody that was on all Eurobasket team in 2017. He was a EuroLeague champion in 2018, also being a very young EuroLeague MVP winner in 2018 as well. His resume was longer than anybody else in draft history going into the NBA draft. But the Atlanta Hawks decided to pass up on Luka Dončić and trade down 2 spots with the Dallas Mavericks. They ended up getting Trae Young at number 5 and an eventual 2019 first-round pick that ended up being Cam Reddish. And Luka Dončić is on his way to potentially winning an NBA Finals as a 25-year-old. He's been on 5 straight All-NBA teams. He won Rookie of the Year in 2019. 5-time All-Star, was the 2024 scoring champion. And like I said, was a generational prospect and someone that could end up being a top 10 player of all time and has the potential to do so. But what's holding this back on being one of the worst trades in draft night history is because Trae Young has been a very good player in this league. He's averaged 25 points and 9.5 assists for the Hawks. So this isn't the worst trade that we're going to mention in this video as a whole, but still, if the Hawks had a redo, they would have rather just selected Luka Dončić at number 3. Hindsight is 2020, but the Seattle SuperSonics made a horrendous draft night trade during the NBA draft in 1987. Who knows how Michael Jordan would be perceived today if he did not have Scottie Pippen by his side to win 6 NBA championships. During the draft in 1987, the SuperSonics traded away Scottie Pippen for Olden Polynice, who was the 8th overall pick by the Bulls out of Virginia. Pippen would go on to win 6 NBA championships with the Chicago Bulls as their number 2 option, and would go on to become a 7-time All-Star, 3-time first-team All-NBA performer, and would become one of the greatest 50 players of all time. Polynice would not go on to do any of those things. In his 15-year NBA career, he averaged 7.8 points, 6.7 rebounds. He was a solid player, but nothing more than that. And who knows what Seattle could have been with Scottie Pippen, Gary Payton, and Shawn Kemp. I said we're going to talk about the Dallas Mavericks a little bit more later on, and here we are. During draft night in 1998, Dirk Nowitzki was taken 9th overall by the Milwaukee Bucks, only to be immediately traded to the Dallas Mavericks, along with Pat Garrity for Robert Traylor. At the time, Traylor was considered one of the top big man prospects in the NBA, but his career never got off the ground. He finished his career with 4.8 points and 3.7 rebounds and only played 2 seasons for the Bucks. And Dirk, of course, went on to become an 11-time NBA All-Star, 12-time All-NBA selection, the current 18th leading scorer in NBA history, and finally an NBA champion and Finals MVP winner in 2011. And has one of the greatest careers for any foreign-born player in NBA history. The second and last trade we're going to talk about is something that happened almost 70 years ago during the 1956 NBA draft. Entering the 1956 NBA draft, the St. Louis Hawks had control over the number 2 overall selection, and the Rochester Royals had already selected C. Green out of Duquesne with the first pick. Since they were unwilling to pay the $25,000 signing bonus that was requested by Bill Russell for whichever team drafted him, the Hawks drafted Russell second overall, but Boston Celtics head coach Red Auerbach had his sights set on Russell. The Celtics gave up their best player, Ed Macauley, as well as Cliff Hagan, who is currently serving time in the military and hasn't played a single minute in the NBA at the time of this deal, in return for Bill Russell. Hagan and Macauley went on to have Hall of Fame careers in the NBA, but neither of their careers topped Bill Russell's, who would not just bring one title to the Celtics, but actually 11. Russell's Celtics won the NBA championship in his rookie year in 1957, and then would go on to win 10 out of 11 years between 1959 and 1969. Russell would go on to become a 5-time NBA MVP and a 12-time All-Star, and is one of the greatest players in NBA history. And the final trade that we're going to mention was during the 1996 NBA draft, when 17-year-old Kobe Bryant was drafted with the 13th overall pick by the Charlotte Hornets, but Kobe made it clear he only wanted to play for one team, the Los Angeles Lakers. So the Hornets pulled off what had to be considered at the time a pretty good trade for a 17-year-old unproven kid by having the Lakers send over starting center Vlade Divac to the Charlotte Hornets in exchange for Kobe Bryant. Divac had been a great player in his 7 years with the Lakers and was coming off his best personal season, in which he scored over 16 points per game. Divac, however, would just go on to play 2 years in Charlotte before moving on to Sacramento, where he would eventually be a key part of the Kings' run towards the top of the Western Conference in the 2000s. But as good as Divac was, 2 seasons of him will never ever make up for trading away Kobe Bryant. Kobe is a 5-time NBA champion, a former MVP, a 2-time Finals MVP winner, 14-time All-Star, and is one of the greatest players of all time. So yeah, that is going to wrap up for me. I hope you guys did enjoy this video talking about some of the worst draft night trades in NBA history. If you agree or disagree with any of them, please let me know in the comments. And if there's a trade that I didn't mention, also let me know down there. And if you did enjoy the video, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.